My son-in-law drove me off my own land on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He stood on the porch of the farmhouse I built with my own 2 hands 38 years ago, pointed toward the gate at the end of the gravel driveway, and told me I was trespassing. I want you to let that settle for a moment. Trespassing. On the 112 acres my father left me, on the land where I buried 2 dogs, a horse named Duchess, and scattered half my wife's ashes along the creek bank. He used that word without flinching, without blinking, like a man who had rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror until it stopped feeling wrong. My daughter Claire stood behind him in the doorway. She did not say a single word. She looked at the floorboards. If you have ever stood on your own ground and been told you do not belong there by someone you fed, clothed, and welcomed into your family, then this story is for you. My name is Walter. I am 66 years old, and I want to tell you exactly what I did next. But first, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Revenge Saga. It helps this old farmer more than you know. Now let me tell you what happened. It started 3 weeks before that Wednesday, though I did not recognize it at the time. My daughter Claire called me on a Sunday evening. She and my son-in-law Marcus had been living in the farmhouse since my wife Dorothy passed 2 years ago. I had offered them the arrangement myself. I thought the house needed life in it. I thought it would be good for their boy, my grandson Noah, to grow up on the land the way Claire had. I moved into the smaller cottage at the edge of the property where I used to store equipment. I fixed it up. It was modest, but it was mine, and I could see the main house from the kitchen window. Claire asked me to come to dinner that Sunday. She sounded stiff on the phone, like someone reading from a card. When I got there, Marcus was already seated at the head of the table. My table, the oak one I built the year Dorothy and I got married. He was wearing a collared shirt and had his laptop open beside his plate, which he had never done before. There were papers next to the laptop, face down. We ate. We talked about nothing. Noah kept looking at me with wide eyes, the way children do when they know the adults are about to say something terrible. He was 8 years old and already too good at reading a room. After dinner, Marcus flipped the papers over and pushed them toward me. He did not slide them gently. He pushed them the way a card dealer pushes chips off the table. He told me it was a land management restructuring agreement. I asked him what that meant. He said that he and Claire had been doing research, and that keeping the farm in my name was a tax liability. He said he had spoken with a financial consultant who specialized in agricultural assets. He said the smart move, the protective move, was to transfer the deed of the farm into a family LLC that he would manage. He said it was standard procedure. He said it would protect me. I looked at Claire. She was staring at her water glass. I asked if Claire had agreed to this. She said it made sense. She said Marcus understood these things better than either of us. I picked up the papers. I read the first page slowly. I had spent 4 decades reading contracts, supplier agreements, and bank documents. I was not a lawyer, but I was not ignorant either. The LLC described in those papers was registered in Delaware. The managing member was listed as Marcus alone. Not Claire. Not a family trust. Not me. Just Marcus. I set the papers down. I told them I would think about it. Marcus's jaw tightened. He said the offer from the developer expired at the end of the month. I asked what developer. There was a silence in the room so total that I could hear the creak through the open kitchen window. Marcus said there had been an offer. A real estate development group out of Nashville wanted to buy 30 acres along the highway frontage of my property to build a commercial corridor. He said it was a significant amount of money, and that if I transferred the deed to the LLC first, the capital gains tax exposure would be dramatically reduced. He said Claire and I would both benefit. He said he was trying to help us. He said the word us, the way a man says it when he means himself. I told him again that I would think about it. I said goodnight to Noah, who hugged my waist so hard I could feel his knuckles against my ribs. I walked back down the gravel path to my cottage in the dark. I did not sleep that night. I started making calls the next morning. The first was to my old friend Raymond, who had been a title attorney in our county for 30 years before he retired. I described the papers to him over the phone, He went quiet in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. He asked me to bring the papers to his house that afternoon. I told him I had not signed them and did not have a copy. He told me to get one and come anyway. I went back to the main house the next morning while Marcus was at work. Claire let me in. She was distant, polished in a way she never used to be, like she was wearing armor underneath her skin. I asked her for a copy of the papers. She hesitated, then printed one from Marcus's laptop without looking at me. I drove to Raymond's house. He read through the document twice. Then he set it on his kitchen table and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He said the LLC structure itself was not unusual, but the managing member clause was. He said that as the sole managing member, Marcus would have the unilateral authority to sell, mortgage, or otherwise encumber any property held by the LLC without my consent. He said once I signed the deed transfer, the farm would effectively belong to Marcus to do with as he pleased. He asked if I trusted my son-in-law completely. I told him the honest answer was that I no longer knew. Raymond leaned back in his chair. He told me he had a friend at the county recorder's office. He said it might be worth asking her to pull any recent filings associated with my property address, just as a precaution. I asked why. He said that in his experience, when someone pushed this hard for a deed transfer on a specific timeline tied to a pending sale, it sometimes meant the sale was further along than they were letting on. He said sometimes it meant something worse. I left his house and drove to the hardware store. I needed time to think, and I always think better when my hands are doing something. I bought a box of fence staples I did not need and drove the long way home past the back edge of my property where the timber stands along the ridge. I pulled over and sat looking at those trees for a long time. My grandfather planted some of them. The wood from this farm built 4 houses in our county. It paid for Claire's college tuition. Marcus wanted to sell 30 acres of it to a strip mall developer. I drove home. 2 days later, Raymond called me. His voice was different, flat and careful, the voice a man uses when he does not want to upset you but has no choice. He told me his friend at the recorder's office had found something. 6 weeks earlier, a deed transfer had been filed for my entire property, all 112 acres. The transferring party listed was me. The receiving party was the Delaware LLC. The document had been notarized and filed with the county. The problem was, I had never signed it. I sat down on the edge of my workbench because my legs stopped working properly. Raymond kept talking. He said the signature on the filed deed was close, but not perfect. He said the notary stamp was from an office in Nashville, not from our county. He said that for someone who knew my actual signature, the differences were visible. He asked me very quietly if I wanted to involve law enforcement. I told him not yet. I said I needed one more day. I sat in my cottage that evening looking out the kitchen window at the lights in the main house. I could see Noah's bedroom window on the 2nd floor, his lamp with the baseball pattern shade that Dorothy and I had given him for his 7th birthday. The light was on, and I could see his small shadow moving across the curtain. That was what cleared my head. Not the fraud. Not the money, not the 112 acres, or 30 years of work, or my grandfather's timber. That little shadow on the curtain. I called Raymond back. I told him I was ready. He said he would reach out to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and to the district attorney's office in the morning. He said real estate deed fraud was a felony. He said, depending on how the LLC was used and whether the Nashville developer had already received communications about the sale, there could be wire fraud implications at the federal level as well. I told him about the Delaware registration. I told him about Marcus telling me the developer offer expired at the end of the month. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walter, I think they were planning to complete the commercial sale before you ever found out about the deed transfer. The timeline matches. Sign the papers under pressure, or if you refused, use the already filed fraudulent deed to proceed without you. Either way, the money goes to Marcus's LLC before you can object." I asked if Claire knew. He said he did not know. He said that was a question only she could answer. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I made a decision. The same kind of decision I had made many times over a life spent building things. When you pour a foundation, you cannot be tentative. You do not ease into it. You commit fully, evenly, and with everything you have got. Otherwise, the whole structure shifts. I was going to let Marcus believe he had won. I was going to give him his signing ceremony. The next morning, I drove up to the main house early. Marcus was eating breakfast. I knocked and walked in the way I always had, the way a man walks into a house he built. He looked up, and I saw the flicker of irritation he tried to cover with a smile. I told him he was right. I told him I had been thinking about it and that I was too old and too tired to fight the math. I said I would sign the papers. I said I wanted to do it properly. In front of the developer. In front of his business people. I said I wanted to leave, with my dignity intact. I said, if I was going to step back from the land my family had worked for 3 generations, I wanted to do it once, formally, in a room full of people, so there was no confusion later. Marcus looked at me the way a man looks at a fish that has swum directly into his net. He said that was very reasonable of me. He said he respected that. He said he would arrange a meeting at the title company in town for Friday evening. He said the developer's representatives would be there, and that we could have the signing witnessed and notarized properly. I nodded. I told him I would even bring coffee cake. It was always Dorothy's tradition at any contract signing. He laughed. He actually laughed. I walked back to my cottage. I had 4 days. I spent the first of those days with Raymond going over every document. He had already spoken with an investigator from the TBI's Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Sandra Pratt, who had been investigating deed fraud schemes across Middle Tennessee for 6 years. She was interested, very interested. Raymond told me she had seen this exact pattern before. The Delaware LLC, the developer pressure deadline, the forged notary stamp from a Nashville office that she already suspected was involved in 2 other cases. Raymond also told me something I had not known. The Nashville Development Group, the one buying the frontage acreage, had received a letter of intent signed with my name 3 weeks ago. A letter I had never written. The developer's representatives believed they were dealing with an authorized agent of the property owner. They had no idea. The owner did not know. That meant Marcus had not only forged my deed, he had forged my signature on a binding letter of intent to a commercial real estate firm. That was wire fraud. That was the federal charge that changed the entire weight of what was coming. On the second day, I drove to the county courthouse and sat with a woman from the recorder's office who pulled every document filed against my property in the past 2 years. There were 3. The fraudulent deed transfer from 6 weeks ago, a property appraisal commissioned by Marcus's LLC, and a preliminary title search ordered by the development company. They had built an entire paper structure on top of a lie. On the 3rd day, a Thursday, I went to pick up Noah from school the way I did every Thursday afternoon. It was our standing arrangement, and one of the few things that Marcus had not yet found a reason to cancel. Noah climbed into the passenger seat of my truck, threw his backpack in the back, and immediately started talking about a book he was reading about a bridge builder in New York City. We drove to the diner on Main Street the way we always did. We ordered pie. I watched him talk and thought about what Raymond had said, about Claire, about whether she knew. I had been afraid to think about it directly. But sitting across from my grandson with cherry pie on his chin, I let myself think about it plainly. Claire was not stupid. She had grown up watching me read contracts and negotiate with vendors and shake hands on deals. She knew what a deed was. She knew what a transfer meant. Whether Marcus had manipulated her, deceived her, or whether she had looked away deliberately because looking away was easier, I did not yet know. But either way, she had stood in the doorway and said nothing while her husband pressured me to sign away my land. She had printed those papers for me without asking why her husband had drafted them. I did not know if that made her a victim or a coward or something in between. I knew only that I loved my daughter and that loving her did not require me to pretend the thing I had seen was something other than what it was. Noah finished his pie. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small mason jar. Inside it was dark soil, the rich black topsoil from the creek bottom of my farm. He slid it across the table to me without looking up. I asked him what it was for. He said he heard his mom and dad talking last week. He said they thought he was asleep. He said he heard his dad say that I was going to move to an assisted living place in Murfreesboro and that the farm was going to be turned into shops and restaurants. He said he had gone down to the creek the next morning before school and filled the jar so I would always have a piece of home even if I had to go away. He still was not looking at me. I picked up the jar. It was cool and heavy in my palm. That soil had grown corn and soybeans in 3 generations of a family. It had been turned by my grandfather's mule and my father's tractor and my own 2 hands. And my 8-year-old grandson had scooped it into a mason jar and carried it to school in his backpack because he was afraid I was disappearing and he wanted me to have something to hold on to. I am not a man who cries easily. I have been to war and to funerals and to the bedside of the woman I loved for 34 years when she stopped breathing. But I sat in that diner booth for a long moment not saying anything, looking at that jar. Then I put it in my jacket pocket. I told Noah to look at me. I told him that I was not going anywhere. I told him that I had never in my life walked away from anything I built, and I was not about to start. I told him that by this time next week, everything was going to be different, and that he needed to trust me. He said, "Okay, Grandpa." He trusted me the way children trust people they love, which is the most complete and terrifying form of trust there is. I drove him home. I watched him run up the porch steps. I sat in my truck for a minute after he went inside. Then, I drove back to my cottage and called Raymond and told him everything was in place. I told him Friday evening, 6 o'clock, the title company on Maple Street. Raymond said Agent Pratt and an assistant U.S. attorney named Daniel Cross would be there. He said Cross had been waiting for a case to connect the Nashville notary office to a broader fraud network and that mine might be it. He said they would arrive at 5:30 and be positioned inside before the 6 o'clock meeting. I told Raymond I was bringing coffee cake. I said Dorothy always brought coffee cake to signings. He said that sounded about right. Friday came the way all important days come, too quickly and with perfect ordinary weather. I woke at 5 in the morning. I made coffee. I baked the coffee cake from Dorothy's recipe, the one with the cinnamon crumble top that she had made for every Thanksgiving, and every contract signing, and every occasion that called for something that said, "I am here, and I mean this." I put on my good shirt, the blue one Dorothy picked out for me the last Christmas she was healthy. I drove to town. The title company was a small brick building on Maple Street with a wooden sign and a parking lot that held maybe 12 cars. Raymond's car was already there. 2 vehicles I did not recognize were parked along the side street, plain dark sedans that blended with the evening in the way official vehicles tend to. I went inside. Raymond was at the conference table with Agent Sandra Pratt and the Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Cross. Pratt was compact and direct, the kind of person whose stillness reads as readiness. Cross was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a yellow legal pad in front of him that was already half covered in notes. I set the coffee cake on the credenza. Raymond introduced me to both of them. Pratt told me that she had obtained the surveillance footage from the Nashville notary office and had identified the individual who had presented fraudulent identification in my name to execute the deed transfer. She said that individual had already been interviewed and had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. She said Marcus's name appeared in the cooperating testimony. Cross told me that the letter of intent to the Nashville developer, the one signed with my forged signature, constituted wire fraud under federal statute. He said that combined with the deed fraud and the LLC structure, Marcus was looking at multiple felony counts with significant sentencing exposure. He asked me if I understood what was about to happen. I told him I had been building things my whole life. He nodded and told me to act naturally. He said to let the meeting proceed until the developer's representative and Marcus had laid out the full terms of the transaction on the table. He said that was when they would need everything said aloud, on record. I told him I could manage that. I went to the small kitchen off the hallway and poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. At 6:15, the door opened. Marcus came in first. He was dressed well, sharper than I had ever seen him, the way a man dresses when he thinks he is about to win something significant. Behind him was a man I did not know, heavy-set, wearing a blazer with the name of the development company embroidered on the chest. Behind that man was a woman carrying a portfolio and a notary seal. Claire was not with them. Marcus saw me at the table and smiled the smile of a man who has mistaken patience for surrender. He introduced me to the developer's representative, whose name was Gary, and to the notary. He told Gary that I was the patriarch of the family, that I had built the farm from the ground up, and that I had agreed to formalize the land transfer this evening. He spoke about me in the third person while I sat 3 feet away. He used the word legacy. He used the phrase building toward the future. Gary from the development company shook my hand. He had a practiced smile and a firm grip. He told me he admired what my family had built and that his company intended to honor the heritage of the property in their commercial design. I told him I appreciated that. Marcus opened his briefcase and laid the documents on the table. The deed transfer agreement, the LLC management authorization, the final letter of intent to Gary's company. He slid the deed transfer in front of me. He handed me a pen. I looked at the document. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. I asked Marcus one question. I asked it quietly, the way I might ask about the weather. I asked him who had filed the deed transfer that was already on record at the county courthouse. The one from 6 weeks ago. The one with my signature on it. The one I had never signed. The room went still. Marcus blinked. He opened his mouth. He said he did not know what I was talking about. I reached into my jacket pocket. I placed the photocopy of the filed deed on the table in front of him. Raymond had given it to me that afternoon. I smoothed it flat with my palm. I told him to look at the signature. Gary from the development company leaned forward. His practiced smile was gone. Marcus pushed the paper away. His voice went tight and fast. He said I was confused. He said this was a clerical matter that had already been addressed. He said the filing was preliminary paperwork that he had been authorized to handle on my behalf. I asked him when I had authorized that. He said we had discussed it. I told him we had discussed his proposal. I told him I had never agreed to it. I told him I had certainly never appeared before a notary in Nashville and signed a deed transfer and a letter of intent and certainly never forged my own name. I said the word forged. The notary Marcus had brought to the meeting stood up from her chair. Gary from the development company said, quite loudly, that nobody had told him there was a dispute over the deed, and that his company had received representations that the property ownership was clear. The door behind Marcus opened. Agent Pratt walked in. Daniel Cross followed. 2 more people came in behind them. People I had not met, but whose windbreakers identified them clearly enough. Marcus turned around. He looked at the room. He looked at the people in it. He looked at me. He said my name. He said it the way a man says something when he is drowning and grabbing for anything that floats. I told him to sit down. He did not sit down. He picked up his briefcase and took 2 steps toward the door. The second step was his last free one for some time. Pratt identified herself. She told Marcus that she had a warrant for his arrest on charges of real estate deed fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, and wire fraud in connection with the fraudulent letter of intent sent to Gary's development company through interstate electronic communication. She read him his rights in a voice that was practiced and unhurried. The voice of a person who has done this enough times that the words are precise without being theatrical. Marcus looked at me over her shoulder while she was still talking. His face had gone the color of old concrete. He said I had set him up. I told him that I had simply turned on the lights. Gary from the development company was on his phone already, speaking quietly but urgently to someone on the other end. He caught my eye and gave me a look that was half apology and half relief. The look of a man who understood he had nearly been used in someone else's crime. Cross was at the table, going through the documents Marcus had brought, logging each one methodically on his yellow legal pad. They handcuffed Marcus near the door. He did not make a scene. The fight had left him quickly, the way it leaves men who have never actually been tested. He had been a schemer, not a fighter. When the scheme collapsed, there was nothing underneath it. The notary Marcus had brought told Cross that she had been hired through an agency and had no prior knowledge of any fraudulent filings. Cross took her contact information and told her she would be contacted. She picked up her bag and left very quickly. Gary followed her out after shaking my hand again and leaving his card on the table, on the off chance I might be interested in discussing any land transactions in the future through proper channels. I put his card in my pocket next to the mason jar of soil Noah had given me. When the room was quiet, Raymond came and stood beside me. We looked at the documents still spread across the conference table, the papers that had been intended to erase 38 years of my life before I could even object. I told Raymond I was going to cut him a piece of coffee cake. He said that was the best idea anyone had had all evening. 3 months passed. Marcus was indicted on 4 felony counts. The cooperating witness from the Nashville notary office provided enough documentation to connect him to 2 prior deed fraud schemes in other counties, which elevated the federal interest significantly. His attorney reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office about a plea agreement. Cross told Raymond that the offer Marcus was prepared to accept involved 30 months in federal custody, full restitution, and a permanent bar from acting as a manager or officer of any LLC or corporation. I did not attend any of the proceedings. I had said what needed to be said in a title company conference room on a Friday evening in October. The justice system could handle the rest. Claire called me the night Marcus was indicted. She was crying before she finished saying my name. She told me she had not known about the deed filing. She said she had known Marcus was pushing the land transfer hard, that she had known about the developer offer, that she had known there was money pressure she did not fully understand. She said she had told herself it was complicated finance the way Marcus always said things were when she asked questions. She said she had wanted to believe he was handling it. I let her finish. Then I told her the truth. I told her that wanting to believe something is not the same as not knowing. I told her that choosing not to ask hard questions about your husband's business is still a choice. I told her that I had watched her stand in her doorway and look at her floorboards, while her husband told me I was trespassing on my own land, and that I needed her to sit with that honestly. She cried harder. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not going anywhere. I told her that love did not require me to pretend what happened had not happened, and that if she wanted a relationship with me going forward, she was going to have to do the work of being someone worth trusting again. She said she understood. I told her it would take time. I told her time was something I was suddenly planning to have a great deal more of. The farm is still mine, all 112 acres of it. Clear title, no encumbrances. My name on the deed, exactly where it belongs. The 30 acres along the highway frontage are still standing in timber. Gary's company withdrew their offer after the indictment, which was fine with me. I hired back 2 men from the county who had worked for me years ago before I scaled back. We are running cattle again on the south pasture for the first time in 4 years. The creek bottom is planted in winter rye. In the spring, Noah and I are going to put in a kitchen garden along the south side of the main house, the way Dorothy always wanted. Noah comes to the farm every Thursday and most Saturdays now. Claire drives him. She does not always come inside, and when she does, the conversations are careful and short, but they are honest. That is something. Last Saturday, Noah and I repaired a section of fence along the east boundary. He is 8 years old and has strong hands and is not afraid of hard work. He holds the post steady while I drive it. He coils wire without being told. He pays attention. When we finished, he sat on the tailgate of my truck and ate the sandwich I had packed, and he said without looking up that he had been thinking about something. I asked what. He said that when his dad comes out of federal custody, if his dad wanted to come see him at the farm, would I let that happen? I thought about it for a moment. I thought about a man who had looked at 112 acres of my life and seen only a financial instrument. I thought about a man who had written my name on a paper I had never touched and carried it to a notary and pretended it meant something. Then I thought about the boy sitting on my tailgate, who had taken a jar and filled it with creek soil and carried it to school in his backpack because he was 8 years old and trying to save something he loved. I told Noah that when his father had served his time and demonstrated that he understood what he had done, we would talk about it. I told him that forgiveness was not a door you opened all at once. I told him it was more like the fence we had just repaired, one post at a time, only when the ground was solid enough to hold it. He thought about that for a long moment. Then he nodded like it made sense to him. We drove back toward the house. The evening light was doing what it does in October. Over open land, turning everything amber and long-shadowed, making the hills look the way they look in old photographs. I have driven this same dirt road 10,000 times in my life. I know every bend and every rut. I know where the road dips, near the old spring box, and where it rises again toward the ridge. I know this land the way I know my own hands. In my jacket pocket, the mason jar of soil sat exactly where I had kept it since Noah gave it to me. I had never put it down. I was not sure I would. There is something I have learned at 66 years old that I wish I had understood at 40. When you spend a lifetime building something, pouring yourself into it, creating something solid out of nothing, you assume that the people who benefit from it understand what it cost. You assume they see the weight of it the way you do. You assume that love makes people honest. It does not. Love that has never been tested does not know its own strength. And generosity that is never earned is a lesson waiting to be taught the hard way. I am not a bitter man. I built this farm. I raised a daughter here. I buried my wife here. I am teaching my grandson here how to hold a fence post and measure twice and keep his word. That is the work. That is the whole work. Everything else, the fraud, the betrayal, the Wednesday afternoon when a man half my age stood on my porch and pointed at my own gate, that was just the test. Every foundation gets tested. That is how you know whether you built it right. Meine Held. If this story reached something in you, if you have ever had to fight for something that was already yours, please hit the like button and share this video. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you gave everything to? Tell me your story below. Subscribe to Revenge Saga so you do not miss the next one. I am Walter. I am 66 years old, and I am still here.